how do you control your thought life? And this is what I mean by this.
These questions are just like rolling. I don't feel like we even solved the last thing.
Well, I mean, we can talk about it for
no, it's wonderful.
15 hours because it's such a big topic. But this is what I have in my mind. Guys' thought life is pretty simple because we're simpletons. It's like, here's my football box. Here's my marriage box. And it's like, that's where I'm at, going to the next box, where women are like, their thought life is like a million miles an hour, and they're thinking,
I like it.
They're going through all stuff like
we're
that.
Multitaskers.
So in this context, where you're trying to encourage your husband and all the things that help him versus taking those things where he doesn't lead, where he doesn't get the hint, where he doesn't help discipline or he doesn't help the kids get ready, can easily in your mind transfer to bitterness, resentment. He's never going to change. Why did I marry this dirtbag? Or however, it goes. How do you control your thought life where you are that Proverbs 31 woman, or you're being the leadership? This could be from a guy's perspective too, where you're trying to lead in the home and she's constantly trying to tear it down. How do you, from both sides, control your thought life so that you're actually honoring the Lord and following Him and not cowtailing to your flesh or the frustration that comes just from being in a marriage relationship where two sinners live together? If that makes sense.
So, I don't know, 2 Corinthians 10 just came to my mind in the sense that we're supposed to take our thoughts captive because there is a war going on outside of us that is spiritual. And so all of the things that you're talking about. So if he is this, then that means that I'm going to go here with my thought life. That is oftentimes fleshy, or just the enemy if it's going to be an automatic negative, I'm going to lump him into this big sum because he didn't do this one thing. So I'm supposed to take my thoughts captive to what is obedient to the Lord. And so Philippians 4 speaks of this. I'm supposed to purposely think on things that are true and lovely. And so I think generally that's how you manage your thought life. But in a marriage situation, I think specifically one of the things that, at least in our marriage, that we both have had to remind each other of is, if I'm doing that, if I'm thinking things that are true about him and I'm thinking things that are true about the Lord, then I'm believing the best about that person. And I am, so if something falls through the cracks and if something's not happening, then I need to not let my mind be trained to go in the automatic, this is the worst case, the world is ending situation. It's, I'm going to think the best, and either he didn't hear it, he didn't see it in the same way, and he needs help in that way maybe. You take your thoughts captive, and it's not any different than any other situation. But I do think that in marriage, it is a good reminder to believe the best of that person, because that's what love does. Love believes all things, and love is kind, and love is patient, and it's an exercise in those things. And all of that is a practice in which you apply to your thought life, but it's also a response in marriage that just needs to be a work of the Spirit, obviously. And there's been times when I needed to be corrected in that area, when he's like, you're assuming all these things because you're not believing the best about me. You've automatically assumed the worst, and I've been guilty of it. And in the same context, it's been the same for him. So I think that's a big pitfall, and I think that's where the enemy takes it. But I think remembering in Corinthians 10, when it talks about the fact that there's a spiritual aspect to our marriages, and there's a spiritual aspect to the attacks that come upon us, and the things that the enemy wants to poke at you with things that your spouse does or doesn't do. And there's a bigger picture. And so in our thought life, we're supposed to take our thoughts captive, that they obey the Lord, and where we continue our thoughts, and then we need to recognize that I need to be prayerful. So.
Ms. Lamerson?
I think the comparison to, we have a million thoughts and we're doing all these things, and
I forgot to speak to that.
I actually think that's a gift that God has given women to be able to manage. I mean, you're talking about this, so there's like a balance. I'm not sure what the question, I don't know how it really, I'm not sure what you said, but
this is what I mean. Guys can absolutely turn their mind off, get in a fight and go, hey, let's go out to pizza.
Okay.
And girls, their thought life just keeps going. So what happens is they get bitter, and all the stuff that in their mind is happening in their marriage builds and builds and builds and builds.
Okay, so I do think that whole passage that I talked about before, Philippians 2, we're to be one-minded, we're to have one mind, we're to have one spirit, we're to be like-minded and not be selfish, not be doing things for myself. And if I'm brutally honest, I think that, like, if we look at ourselves in the right manner, like, I'm a bigger sinner than Zach ever will be. Like, if we look at what Christ has given up and died on the cross for me, I can't look at him and just constantly be thinking he's this and he's that and he's that. Like, I'm just thankful. Like, I'm just thankful to be here. And so truly half the time when I'm mad at my husband, I just put it in perspective of thankfulness. Like, I am thankful to have a husband. I am thankful that he works. Like, this lady whose husband is lazy, like, he went to work all day. Like, some wives would just desire that, just to have a husband. So I guess I would focus on things that are true and noble and just and lovely. And like Lindsay said, and believe the best. And so love believes all things. And so with my husband, when he didn't come up to pray with my sons, I didn't just instantly think like he's a jerk and he doesn't care about me. You know, I know that he loves me. I see it in other ways, but he is a man and he fails in other aspects. And I think if women could just look at men and just know they have their faults. Men and women are created different. And I don't care what society says. Like, I have gifts and my husband has gifts and there are failures that he has and weaknesses. And so in those things where he's not a leader, when he's not kind sometimes, or when he's absent-minded, or he's one-track-minded, that's like the thing that bothers me the most about my husband. That way he can just like Matt said, they just zone in. Like, I want him to be like me. I want him to multitask and be able to communicate and do all these things. I need to be thankful for how God made him. And then if you need to fight, just fight. Like Zach and I have fought so many times about him not leading, and it's been so fruitful. I asked him before we got here, I said, hey, because we saw a question before, it said, hey, how would you encourage for women to get their husbands to lead? And he said, just do what you did. Like, you would just tell me what you want and you would pray, and I would feel convicted when I didn't do it because I knew my wife wanted it. And the Bible's really clear. He's supposed to at least try to meet the needs if he's godly at all, right? And so with that, and then I fought. He said, we had lots of fights and they were great. And so I would encourage you to take your thoughts captive, to be kind, to look at your husband in a real respect of the fact that, you know what, be thankful that you have him. Be thankful you have kids to even go tuck in. Be thankful you have lunches to make. And I think if we're thankful, we'll have a lot less bitterness and frustration. So, and then have fights. Fight about it. Go pray and ask God if you can fight. And then if you really, truly can't come to agreement, I think marriage counseling is amazing. The Bible's really clear. There is safety in the multitude of counselors. Go sit with someone and say the things that you say to him, and most likely God's going to untangle those thoughts of lies that you've been believing. So I have to say my lies out loud sometimes to friends, and then they're like, what are you saying? So find a good friend and go do that. And I think that the more you honor your husband, the more that he's going to want to serve you.
And I do think, to speak to what you're talking about, where a wife can have this thought life apart from maybe the reality of what she's conveyed to her husband, I think communication is the loving aspect of that. And so bringing those things that are frustrating to you to him in a time that he can hear it and in a way that he can hear it, which is dependent on your husband. So I've literally asked Matt before, how do you want me to say this? And it's been super helpful, his answer, because that is not at all what I would have thought. And I can completely address it that way, and I can propose it that way. And it means that he's able to receive it. And so having these conversations, and sometimes they're going to turn into a fight, and that is okay. Yeah. That's truly fighting for your marriage and fighting for an open communication. I would advocate for that all day long. So storing things up and not dealing with them either with the Lord. So sometimes the Lord might just say, we're just going to deal with that, and you're going to forgive him and move on, and you're not going to say anything. And there's other times when I'm supposed to speak up, because that's loving to him, because he does want to love me, and he does want to be the husband that God's called him to be, and do it in understanding, like that passage was talking about. And so I think as wives, the pitfall can be that we choose to just assume that he didn't get it and not say anything and think that that's loving, and that's not loving. Because he really didn't get it, because they really do think differently.
Or give a solution. So if there's a way you want him to lead, I truly think this is like in everything. You can't just have these blanket statements where you're like, you're not a leader. Like, what exactly do you want him to lead in? Do you see that's an issue? And so if you want him to lead in the discipline of your kids, then the next time one of your kids gets in trouble, you say to him, honey, will you please decide their punishment? And when he makes that punishment, you kiss him big and say thank you, and you do that punishment. I don't care if you agree. I don't care at all if it's a complete opposite of what you do. You say, will you please take this over? And when he takes it over, you kiss him big when he does it, and you just are thankful that he did it. So you can't have your way and have him lead. So you have to realize that. Like, we have to give up what we want in some aspects and let him lead. So like Matt said, don't challenge him once he does do what you asked.
There's a way to fight fair, too, and by saying you're not a leader, from a guy's perspective, like,
Oh.
what am I supposed to do with that? Like, the only thing I can do
You're
is
set up to
walk
fail.
away, or if I'm not a Christian, it's like punch the wall. It's like, well, thanks for that. I'm not a leader. There's no hope. Why did you marry me? It's like, that's not helpful. So pick something else. There's a lot more that can be said about that, and I'm going to soapbox it if I don't move on to the next question. But I did want to say this. Whether you realize it or not, everything they quoted was in line with Philippians 4, 6 through 8, the whole process. Don't be anxious. Go to the Lord in prayer. Be thankful for what He's done in your life. Replace your thought life with meditating on spiritual things. And it's probably because of the Spirit giving them that, or they're doing it from memory. But I just want to point out to you to go through that verse, because that's the specific digits for that.